Hi, I'm Frank Bentley from Yahoo, part of Verizon Media, and today I'll be talking about different survey methodologies that you can use, and specifically the quality, efficiency, and representative nature of the responses that you can get when you put a survey out to a variety of different platforms. If I had to capture this talk in one sentence, it would be, what are the pros and cons of different survey platforms? So if you're running a survey, how can you decide which platform to use? What are the pros? What are the cons? What should you choose when you pick a particular platform? So in HCI, we use surveys a lot. Surveys can be used to size data from qualitative interviews. You might do an affinity analysis after talking to 10 or 15 people. You find some themes, and then you want to know how common is this behavior in the broader US population? Or which of these design ideas could have the biggest market opportunity? Or maybe there's some old research that you did 5 years ago and you're like, is this still true? Does this still hold in the broader population? So you might do a survey to size that. You also might do a survey to rapidly get feedback from diverse audiences. So you might put an open-ended question like this about notifications out to a group of people, and you want to quickly get feedback from a few hundred people to see the diversity of responses that you get, some themes, some opportunities for design, and just quickly get feedback from a lot of different people. Or you might want to collect usage data from large samples. This is something we've done a lot of. We have people upload their Google Home history or their news browsing history or things like that. And we can get a representative sample of usage history from a broad set of people. And that can help us to understand how people use systems that we don't control, that we don't have all the back-end usage logs to. And so there are a lot of reasons that people do surveys in HCI. And there are a lot of different platforms that you can use to deploy the surveys. You could put things out to Mechanical Turk or SurveyMonkey or internal panels that you might have. Or you might use more full service platforms such as Maru or Dynata to get you representative samples of people. And there are pros and cons to each of these methods. For example, something to an internal panel might be free, a study to Mechanical Turk might be a few $100s, and something to one of these professional research firms might cost you almost $10,000. And so one of the big questions of this research that I'm presenting today is that worth it? In what situations is it worth it to use a professional market research firm to conduct research? And then what are the pros and cons of using these different self-service and cheaper and faster research methods? So the main problems are that when you do this kind of research, you need a representative sample of respondents. If everybody you get is 18 to 24 and male and living in the Northeast, you're going to get data that you can't trust, right? So you need to have a representative sample of the broader population. And depending on your research questions, what representative means is different. So, for example, if you're looking to deploy something mass market in the US, you want a representative sample of everybody in the United States. But if you're looking at, for example, a news website, maybe what's really important is that you have the split of conservative versus liberal that represents the broader population. And that might not be something you care about for other studies that you run. Another problem is that you need robust and open-ended feedback. For any of these kinds of studies where you have an open-ended field, you want to make sure people say more than just yep or nope, and they actually give you the kind of feedback and stories and anecdotes that you want for your data collection. And there are also constraints on your cost or time. Maybe you just have $200 to spend, and you want to know what's the best you can do with that amount of money. Or you need an answer in a couple hours. So if you only have 2 hours, what's the best you can do? What kind of error can you expect in those responses compared to a ground truth? So our research questions followed from this. We wanted to know how the audiences from these major survey providers vary when looking at demographics, technology use, education income, political affiliation, and some other dimensions. We wanted to see how open-ended responses vary among these survey providers, both in terms of how much people write and the relevance of their answers. Because ideally, you want a relevant response that has at least a few sentences of data in there so you can understand their experience. And then we wanted to look at the limitations and advantages of the lower cost survey providers, specifically speed. So if you do something that's cheap and fast, how good are the results? Are they things you can trust? Are they things you could publish? Are they things you could use in a business context to go build a product around? Those are the kinds of questions that we had. So our method, we wrote a single 20-question survey, and we deployed that to 10 survey platforms on the same date last summer. And we got 6,007 total respondents across these 10 different survey platforms. The survey had some questions on demographics, on technology and media use, on lifestyle and habits, including political opinions. And we wanted to look at how representative these were. So then we found ground truth data for 80 of the possible responses. So there's 20 questions, but each have multiple possible responses. For 80 of those responses, we found ground truth. And so that came from government sources like the US Census Bureau. For some of the technology use, it came from sites like ComScore that actually embed pixels and track what people are doing on the internet. And then we looked at the differences between the data that we got from the survey platforms and the ground truth to see how accurate each of these platforms actually was. These were the 10 panels that we used. We had 3 that were professionally managed. We had 3 that were in the do-it-yourself category, or some of these faster, cheaper methods. We had 3 that were research participant panels that we have access to at Yahoo. And then we had 1 that was a convenience sample, which was just a Yahoo employee list. Often people will send something out to their lab or their university, and we wanted to see how bad is that. And we'll share that with you in a few minutes. So these are all the different panels and just some basic stats about each of them. And what you can see here is that there are vastly different costs and time to completion and error rates across these different panels. For example, on cost, our cheapest was $350. Our most expensive was almost $10,000. When we look at the time to completion, our fastest was 2 hours, and we had some other ones here at around 9 hours or 15 hours, but the longest took 6 days to get the data. So you can see there's a very different scale here in terms of time to completion if you need your results right away. And then these are sorted by error rates. So when we look at all the questions, for each question, difference between the response and the ground truth, and then the average of those across all 80 questions or 80 responses where we had ground truth, you can see the omnibus panel here had a 3.9% median error rate, and the employees panel had a 16.4% median error rate. So we can see already we should not trust these convenience samples and just surveying people who might be more like ourselves than the broader population. So what do those overall error rates look like? This just is a box plot showing what those looked like. Everything from SurveyMonkey 250 to the left of that dashed vertical line, were statistically indistinguishable. So these all performed very well. They had median error rates in the 3 to 5%. And you can see they had vastly different costs. So the SurveyMonkey 250 panel cost us $500 and was done in 9 hours and had statistically indistinguishable error rates from some of these very expensive panels. When we look at the demographics, and in all these charts I'll be showing anything that's in green is more than 10% overrepresented, and everything that is in red is more than 10% underrepresented. And we can see that most of these panels from SurveyMonkey 250 to the left, the ones that performed very well, look pretty good on age and education level and ethnicity and city type. You can see some are worse at getting 18 to 24. So Springboard America in particular didn't do very well in the 18 to 24 range. One of our internal user panels didn't do so well in that as well. So if you're targeting a platform where you want it to be used by people in that population, you want to make sure you pick a panel that has that represented at a fairly good level. SurveyMonkey here did quite well, as did Omnibus. And you can see also a couple panels underrepresented the American South. So if you have a service that you want deployed kind of everywhere, including the South, you want to make sure you pick one that has that part of the US well represented. When we look at tech and media use, we can see a lot of green. So a lot of the participants who used these survey panels used a lot of different technology, more than the average population. You can see in particular iPhone and iPad use were fairly overrepresented, as well as personal laptops were pretty overrepresented. So again, when you're doing these types of studies, it's best to pick something that does the best at capturing the type of user that you need. And so if you're looking at something that looks at computer use, making sure you pick a panel that has laptop or desktop usage fairly close to the US population will get you something much more representative for your needs. Really interesting, Amazon Mechanical Turk has almost no people who subscribe to physical newspapers. That was just kind of interesting, that little outlier point there. So when we look at lifestyle and opinion, most interesting here to us was this presidential approval rating. We asked the exact presidential approval question that has been used in prior literature for decades, actually. And we can see that a few of these panels underestimate the approval of the current US president, while some are much closer. So again, if you're doing research on news or you're doing research on political opinion in some way, making sure you pick the panels that have the best representative sample here. You can see Omnibus is fairly close, Springboard America is pretty close, to the ground truth there. So that'll get you a much more representative sample of political viewpoints if you choose those panels. Now we'll look at the open-ended responses. So we had two open-ended questions. One asked them why they chose to take surveys, and the other asked about a notification they had received on their phone that was annoying to them. And so when we look at these, Mechanical Turk actually had the longest responses in terms of mean characters and the highest percentage that gave more than 2 sentences of a response. So we do recommend using Mechanical Turk if you are doing a study that relies on open-ended responses. And then looking at why people completed surveys, maybe not surprisingly, Mechanical Turk is very high in terms of compensation. But if you look at panels like Springboard America, people are on that panel to be heard, to get their opinion out there, and to make a difference based on their responses. And you can see our UXR panel here, our internal research panel, that had a high having impact score. So those participants know that we listen to their feedback and we use it to improve our products, and that's why they continue to participate. So what are the implications of this? The low-cost platforms do surprisingly well. For $500 on SurveyMonkey with 250 respondents, in 9 hours, we got data that was just as good as panels that were almost $10,000. We should use different platforms when you need different audiences. So if you're doing news research, you want to get a panel that's better represented in terms of political opinion than some of the other platforms. And different panels are better for detailed open-ended responses. Mechanical Turk and some of our in-house panels provided more detailed responses than some of the panels that scored better on other metrics. And then we should avoid convenience samples. So the employee panel was the least accurate by far. It had a very, very high error rate. And we know this. We know that people who are like us are very different from the general population. And so we should not sample our colleagues, sample our schoolmates, sample our fellow employees, because those responses will be very skewed. And that is all I had to talk about today. So it's unfortunately we couldn't all be in Hawaii chatting, but if you have any questions, please feel free to send me an email or contact me on Twitter, and I'd be happy to respond. Thank you so much for your time and watching this presentation today.